Hello and welcome to the fifth session. Now today I don't really have a specific subject. What we are trying to do, of course, is eventually get into the actual growing part, that growing component. And some of you are probably anxious, what are we waiting for? Gardening courses are not done like that. They're done in the field and you get pots of soil and roots and pruners and all of that. We're not going to be covering this, as I said before. This is not a gardening course. It's not horticulture. It's not about the techniques of how you grow things. It's about the principles. It's about knowing the things you need to know about how to grow things. This is why I started with our nutritional need. And our nutritional need is a basic thing, because if you want to grow for food, you have to grow things that are good enough to sustain your nutrition. And I must emphasize something here very important, that I'm not here to advocate any particular diets or to knock any diets either. So I'm not here to say to you, no, you have to be vegan or vegetarian or lacto-vegan or eat meat or whatever. I'm not going to do any of this. There's so many different diets around, and each one claims to be the perfect one, and obviously not all diets are good for all people, so that's a personal option. This is not the subject of my discussion here. And I'm also not going to tell you whether it is better for you to cook food, not cook it, eat it raw, half raw. That's all a personal option. You decide for yourselves. However, you got to remember that whatever you do, whichever way you eat your food and what you eat, you have to be able to supply yourself with those basic ingredients: the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, the amino acids that come from the protein, the vitamins and the minerals, etc. These are the things that I'm talking about. And how do we get them from the plant? That's the other very important thing. Okay? Which really brings to mind the fact that some people that I have seen around me recently have been keen, people with land specifically, have been keen on, growing chickens for both eggs and also poultry. Now, if you really want to be independent, you have to be able to feed those chickens. Now, let me tell you something which is very important here. If you need, let's look at protein alone. We said that an adult needs about 60 grams of protein a day. All right? Okay. Now, chickens and sheep and goats and, all animals, they don't produce protein. They don't. You have to give it to them. They eat it. Some of it they use, for energy and stuff. And the other part they accumulate in the term of flesh, in the way of flesh. Now, in animal production, in the science of animal production, which is not really my area, but the growers talk about this so-called feed conversion ratio. Now, look it up if you're not familiar with this term. Feed conversion ratio. Now, I don't know how many of you ever wonder, why is it that when you go and buy chicken meat, it's much less expensive than, say, red meat? The main reason is because the feed conversion ratio for chicken is much less than it is, say, for beef or lamb. So what is the feed conversion ratio? The feed conversion ratio is the ratio between the amount of feed you give to the animal versus what you get out of it in terms of meat. Now, I know it's cruel to talk about animals in this garden, but that's how it is. We have to talk about these things. Again, I'm not advocating any lifestyle. That's entirely up to you. I respect people's decisions. Now, when it comes to commercial growing of poultry, those big commercial growers, of course, there's a big difference to them in the cost if the conversion ratio is 2-to-1 or 1.99-to-1. One tiny percent of a part of a percent to them, if they're growing millions of chickens every month, it makes a big difference at the cost of feeding. So they have worked it to a T, which is rather unpleasant to know about, really, because they have to sacrifice or kill the chook at the age when it reaches, when this conversion ratio starts to go up. So they can't kill it too soon, they can't kill it too late, because there's a time when this is maximized, and that's, I think, it's about 55 days. And they normally work at around 1.8 as a conversion ratio. Now, I don't think that any non-professional can achieve this target, and it's a difficult figure to deal with. But let's assume that it's 2. So, if you want to get a kilo of meat out of a chicken, you have to give it 2. You have to feed it 2. You see? So if you're growing and preparing yourself to get 20 kilograms of protein from a vegan diet, as it were, if you want to use that food that you're growing to feed chicken, and then you want to eat the chicken, you're going to have to double it. Which makes it a bit more complex, really, for people who want to do these things. But I'm sure that people who have gone into growing poultry understand this, because unless they are able to grow that food for the chooks, they're going to have to buy it. Now, when it comes to other things, when it comes to red meat, when it comes to lamb and deer and other stuff, the ratio is 10 to 1. So you have to give it 10 kilos against 1 kilo that you get back. This is why red meat is much more expensive than chicken meat. I don't know about fish. I really don't know. I mean, about farmed fish. So those things that you have to put in for you to be able to get out. And when it goes to the plants, the same thing applies. You want to get a crop out of the plant, so you have to put this input any whichever way. And it doesn't matter whether you want to grow the plants inside a plastic tunnel, under your bed with artificial lighting, on top of a tree hanging from baskets, in the soil, in a soilless culture, hydroponically. It doesn't really matter, because these are the requirements of the plants. We're not talking techniques here, we're talking about basic food requirements. So, we are going to in the next session, start seriously talking about those minerals, one by one, probably. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. This is all, it has been prepared. You know, I have prepared an outline, but as I start recording it, you know, other ideas come in, and especially ideas for presentation. So we are finally going to get into the actual growing component. Okay, so in the next session, we will be talking primarily about nitrogen. How and when does the plant get its nitrogen, and the importance of nitrogen? Because it is, just to give you a little bit of a heads up, the nitrogen is that component that turns into amino acid, which turns into protein. And unless the plant has enough nitrogen, it will not be able to convert it to, it will not be able to produce amino acids. And if it can't produce amino acids, it cannot produce proteins. So I think we've had a very long introduction, you know, like 5 sessions, and we haven't started to really talk about plants. I do apologize for that, but I think you understand and realize that it's very important to understand these things, know the foundations, so you know which way to go and which way to plan. So thank you for listening.